People like you don't belong in first class. I don't care what your ticket says.
The words hung in the air like poison at Gate B-24 of Miami International Airport. Captain Victoria Ashford, 45, stood at the jet bridge entrance, her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled emerald eyes cold as winter frost. Her pilot uniform was tailored to perfection, accentuating every curve of her 5'8" frame. Red lipstick applied with precision manicured nails gleaming, she looked like she'd stepped off the cover of a luxury magazine rather than preparing to fly a commercial aircraft. She was speaking to Dr. Jasmine Williams, a 35-year-old African-American woman whose professional navy blazer and calm demeanor suggested someone accustomed to authority. But, in this moment, Jasmine was just another passenger trying to board a plane to attend her grandmother's funeral. Before we dive deeper into this story, I want to know where you watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. And if you believe respect has no color, hit that subscribe button right now. Because in the next 25 minutes, you're going to witness something that will change how you think about power prejudice and justice forever. What Captain Victoria Ashford didn't know was that she had just made the worst mistake of her professional life. The woman standing in front of her wasn't just another passenger. Dr. Jasmine Williams was the Director of Aviation Safety Compliance for the Federal Transportation Authority, and she held the power to ground entire airlines with a single phone call. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's rewind to how this moment began. 36 hours earlier, Dr. Jasmine Williams had been in her Washington, D.C. office reviewing safety compliance reports for major airlines when her phone rang. The voice on the other end was her cousin Marcus, calling from Atlanta with news that would shatter her world. "Jasmine, you need to sit down," Marcus said, his voice thick with tears. "It's Grandma Rose. She's gone." The words hit Jasmine like a physical blow. Rose Williams had been the cornerstone of their family, the woman who raised Jasmine after her parents died in a plane crash when she was 8 years old. Grandma Rose had worked 3 jobs to send Jasmine to Harvard Law School, had been in the front row when she graduated summa cum laude, and had cried tears of pride when Jasmine was appointed to her current position at the Federal Transportation Authority. "The funeral is Thursday morning," Marcus continued. "She planned everything. You know how she was. Service at Mount Olive, Baptist burial at Greenwood Cemetery. The family wants you to speak." Jasmine closed her eyes, steadying herself against her desk. She had been flying around the country for 3 weeks straight, investigating safety violations at various airports. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, and now she had lost the most important person in her life. "I'll be there," she whispered, "whatever it takes." That's how Jasmine found herself at Miami International at 7:15 a.m. on Tuesday morning, having caught the first available flight from her previous inspection in Orlando. Flight 447 to Atlanta was the only connection that would get her home in time for the funeral. She had used her accumulated frequent flyer miles to upgrade to first class, not for luxury, but for the emotional space to grieve in private during the 2-hour flight. Jasmine Williams was not a woman given to displays of emotion in public. 12 years in aviation oversight had taught her that composure was everything. She had investigated plane crashes, interrogated airline executives who put profits over safety, and testified before Congress about regulatory failures. Her colleagues respected her methodical approach, her unshakable calm under pressure, and her absolute commitment to protecting the flying public. But today was different. Today, the professional facade was a fragile shell, protecting a woman in deep mourning. She approached Gate B-24 carrying a small black leather briefcase and a single carry-on bag. Inside the briefcase were her federal credentials, various investigation files, and a worn photograph of her grandmother taken at Jasmine's law school graduation. Rose Williams had been so proud that day, telling everyone who would listen that her granddaughter was going to keep those airplanes safe for everybody. The gate area was crowded with the usual mix of business travelers, families, and tourists. Skyline Airways flight 447 was fully booked, a common Tuesday morning rush to Atlanta. The departure board showed an on-time departure of 8:30 a.m., but Jasmine could sense tension in the air. Gate agent Miguel Santos, a nervous 28-year-old Hispanic man with kind eyes, was fielding complaints about delayed baggage loading and a missing crew member. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the slight delay," Miguel announced over the gate speaker. "We're waiting for one final crew member to report, and we should begin boarding within the next 15 minutes. Jasmine took a seat near the window watching aircraft taxi on the tarmac outside. Flying had been her passion since childhood, inspired initially by dreams of becoming a pilot herself. Those dreams had shifted after her parents' accident, channeling instead into a determination to make aviation safer for everyone. She thought about how proud Grandma Rose had been of that choice. "You're doing God's work, baby girl," Rose had said during their last conversation just a week ago. "Keeping all those people safe up in the sky. Your parents would be so proud." Now, Rose was gone, and Jasmine felt an overwhelming sense of loss, mixed with gratitude for the woman who had shaped her life so completely. The gate area began to buzz with activity as passengers prepared for boarding. Jasmine noticed other travelers pulling out phones, some live streaming on social media, others checking the news. In recent months, several viral incidents involving airline discrimination had made passengers more vigilant about documenting inappropriate behavior. Isabella Romano, a 29-year-old Italian-American fashion blogger from New York, was traveling to Atlanta for a photography shoot. She had built a substantial social media following by documenting both beautiful destinations and social injustices she witnessed during her travels. Isabella kept her phone ready, always prepared to capture moments that mattered. David Miller, a 42-year-old white businessman and frequent flyer, was returning from a successful conference in Miami. He had over 200,000 followers on TikTok, where he shared travel tips and occasionally highlighted customer service experiences, both positive and negative. First Officer Ryan Blake, 31, was running late due to a traffic accident on I-95. He had called ahead to apologize and was rushing through airport security as passengers gathered at Gate B-24. Ryan was known among Skyline Airways staff as someone with strong moral convictions, a pilot who had once reported a captain for drinking before a flight, despite potential career repercussions. Jessica Torres, a 24-year-old Hispanic flight attendant, was also rushing to make the flight. She had worked with Captain Victoria Ashford before and knew her reputation for being demanding and occasionally inappropriate with passengers. Jessica had witnessed Victoria make subtle discriminatory comments in the past, but had been too intimidated to report them formally. At 7:45 a.m., Miguel Santos received word that all crew members had finally arrived. He prepared to make the boarding announcement when Captain Victoria Ashford emerged from the corridor leading to crew areas. Victoria Ashford was impossible to ignore. At 45, she maintained the kind of stunning appearance that commanded attention wherever she went. Her platinum blonde hair was styled in a sleek bob that framed her face perfectly. Her emerald eyes seemed to assess and judge everything they encountered. She stood 5'8" with an athletic build and curves that she accentuated with her perfectly tailored uniform. Victoria came from Old Money, a wealthy Connecticut family that had instilled in her a sense of entitlement and social hierarchy. She had been flying for Skyline Airways for 20 years, accumulating an impressive safety record, but also a hidden file of complaints from passengers and crew members. Her beauty and family connections had protected her from serious consequences, with complaints often dismissed or buried in bureaucratic processes. She viewed her aircraft as her personal kingdom where her word was absolute law. Over the years, Victoria had developed increasingly bold, discriminatory practices targeting passengers she deemed unworthy of premium services. She was particularly skilled at creating plausible technical or policy excuses for her behavior. Victoria scanned the gate area, with her predatory gaze automatically assessing passengers in the first-class boarding line. Her eyes stopped on Dr. Jasmine Williams, and something dark flickered across her expression. Here was an African-American woman, professionally dressed but not wearing obvious designer labels, preparing to board her first-class cabin. In Victoria's warped worldview, this was an intrusion that needed to be corrected. Miguel began the boarding announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, Skyline Airways Flight 447 with service to Atlanta is now ready for boarding. We'll begin with the first class, our Platinum members and passengers needing special assistance. Jasmine gathered her belongings and joined the small line of first-class passengers. She presented her boarding pass and ID to Miguel, who scanned them without issue. "Thank you, Dr. Williams. Have a pleasant flight," Miguel said with a genuine smile. Jasmine nodded and began walking toward the jet bridge. That's when Captain Victoria Ashford stepped directly into her path. "Excuse me," Victoria said, her voice carrying an authority that made nearby passengers turn to look. "There's been an error. First class is restricted today." Jasmine stopped confusion, crossing her face. "I'm sorry, what kind of restriction security protocols?" Victoria said smoothly, her emerald eyes cold and calculating. "We're only boarding verified passengers in premium cabins today, not promotional upgrades or complimentary tickets." "I'm not flying on a promotional ticket," Jasmine replied calmly. "I purchased this upgrade with my accumulated miles." Victoria's perfect red lips curved into a condescending smile. "I'm sure that's what your confirmation says, but I can spot a freebie from across the terminal, honey. Why don't you check with the gate agent about finding you something more appropriate for your situation?" The words hit like a slap, delivered with such smooth professionalism that some observers might miss the insult entirely. But Jasmine Williams had spent her entire career dealing with the subtle and overt discrimination. She recognized exactly what was happening. "Would you like to see my receipt?" Jasmine asked, her voice remaining level despite the anger building inside her chest. "Oh, I'm sure you have documentation," Victoria said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "But as the captain of this aircraft, I have final authority over passenger seating. And I've determined that first class is restricted to paying customers today. Real paying customers." Behind them, the boarding line had ground to a halt. Miguel looked increasingly uncomfortable, unsure how to handle a situation involving his captain. Isabella Romano had discreetly pulled out her phone and begun recording. David Miller noticed the tension and activated his TikTok live stream. "Is there a problem here?" asked First Officer Ryan Blake, who had just arrived and immediately sensed the uncomfortable atmosphere. Victoria didn't take her eyes off Jasmine. "Just explaining our security protocols to this passenger. She seems confused about her seating assignment." Ryan glanced at Jasmine's boarding pass, clearly visible in her hand. "Captain, that looks like a valid first-class boarding pass to me. Are you questioning my judgment?" Ryan Victoria's voice carried a warning that made the young first officer take a step back. Dr. Jasmine Williams had reached a decision point. She could back down, avoid the confrontation, find another flight, and miss her grandmother's funeral. Or she could stand her ground and see exactly how far Captain Victoria Ashford was willing to take her discrimination. She thought about Grandma Rose, who had cleaned office buildings at night and taken buses across town to work as a hotel housekeeper during the day, all to provide for her granddaughter. Rose Williams had never backed down from injustice, had taught Jasmine that dignity was something you carried within yourself, something no one could take away unless you handed it over. "Captain Ashford," Jasmine said, her voice clear and steady. "I am a ticketed first-class passenger on this flight. I have valid documentation and identification. Are you refusing to allow me to board based on my appearance?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Victoria's eyes flashed with anger at being questioned so directly. She was accustomed to passengers who backed down when confronted with her authority. "I'm refusing to allow you to board because I suspect you're traveling under fraudulent circumstances," Victoria said, her voice rising slightly. "And frankly, yes, you don't look like the type of person who typically flies first class on my aircraft." Gasps erupted from the nearby passengers. Isabella's phone captured every word. David's TikTok live stream suddenly had dozens of viewers commenting in real time. Miguel reached for his radio to call his supervisor. Jessica Torres, who had been approaching the gate to begin pre-flight checks, stopped in her tracks as she witnessed the confrontation. She had seen Victoria display prejudice before, but never so blatantly in public. Did she just say what I think she said? Isabella whispered to her phone's camera, now live streaming to her 50,000 Instagram followers. Dr. Jasmine Williams took a slow, deliberate breath. In her briefcase was her federal identification credentials that gave her authority over every commercial aircraft in American airspace. She could end this confrontation with a single phone call. But something told her to wait to let Victoria Ashford continue digging her own professional grave. "I see," Jasmine said quietly. "And what exactly do people who fly first class look like?" Captain Victoria Ashford smiled, a predator who thought she had cornered her prey. She had no idea she was about to trigger a chain of events that would destroy her career, expose an airline's hidden culture of discrimination, and create one of the most viral confrontations in aviation history. "Oh, honey," Victoria said, her voice laden with condescension. "I think we both know the answer to that question." The tension at gate B-24 was thick enough to cut with a knife. Captain Victoria Ashford stood blocking Jasmine's path to the aircraft, her perfectly manicured hand resting on her hip in a pose that suggested she was accustomed to getting her way. Her emerald eyes glittered with the kind of cruel satisfaction that comes from wielding power over someone perceived as powerless. "I know your type." Victoria continued, her voice carrying across the gate area where more passengers were beginning to pay attention. "You people get one little upgrade maybe through some diversity program or mistake in the computer system, and suddenly you think you belong in first class. Well, not on my aircraft." Jasmine Williams felt her grandmother's voice echoing in her mind. "Baby girl, when someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. And when they try to make you feel small, you stand tall and show them what dignity looks like." Captain Ashford Jasmine said, her voice steady as steel, "I'd like you to be very clear about what you're saying. Are you denying me boarding based on the color of my skin?" Victoria laughed, a sharp sound that carried no warmth. "Oh, please, don't play the race card with me. This is about class, not color. This is about people knowing their place and respecting the natural order of things. First class is for first-class people, not—" She gestured dismissively at Jasmine, "whatever promotional situation you're working with here." Miguel Santos had been furiously typing on his gate computer, growing more uncomfortable by the second. "Captain," he interrupted hesitantly, "I'm showing Dr. Williams' upgrade was purchased with accumulated frequent flyer miles. Her account shows over 200,000 miles earned through business travel." Victoria whirled on the young gate agent. "Miguel, is it? Let me explain something to you about how this works. I am the captain of this aircraft. I have final authority over passenger safety and seating assignments. If I determine that a passenger poses a security risk or is traveling under suspicious circumstances, I have not only the right, but the obligation to deny boarding." But Captain Miguel protested. "Her documentation appears to be—" Fraudulent. Victoria cut him off sharply. "I've been flying for 20 years. I can spot fake documents from across a terminal. And frankly, this whole situation smells like fraud to me." Ryan Blake stepped forward, his young face troubled. "Captain, perhaps we should contact airport security to verify." "Don't tell me how to do my job." Ryan. Victoria snapped, her voice carrying the kind of authority that had intimidated crew members for 2 decades. "You're a first officer, I'm the captain. My word is final." But Victoria's outburst had attracted exactly the wrong kind of attention. Isabella Romano's Instagram livestream now had over 3,000 viewers, with comments flooding in from around the world. David Miller's TikTok had been shared dozens of times with hashtags like "skyline shame" and "racist pilot" beginning to trend. "This is unbelievable," Isabella whispered to her phone camera. "We're witnessing blatant discrimination happening in real time at Miami International Airport. This pilot is refusing to let a black woman board first class, claiming her tickets are fraudulent." The comments on her stream were coming in faster than she could read them. "Call the news. This is disgusting. Get her name, record everything. Make this go viral." David Miller had switched to a wider camera angle, capturing both Victoria and Jasmine in the frame. His follower count was climbing rapidly as people shared the stream across platforms. Jessica Torres approached cautiously, her face pale with recognition. She had worked dozens of flights with Victoria Ashford and had witnessed this behavior before, though never quite so blatantly. Usually, Victoria was more subtle, finding technical excuses or policy violations to target passengers she deemed unworthy. "Captain Ashford?" Jessica said quietly, "Perhaps I could assist with resolving the situation." Victoria turned her predatory gaze on the young flight attendant. "Jessica. Wonderful. Perfect timing. I need you to escort this woman away from the gate area. She's disrupting the boarding process with false documents and unreasonable demands." "Ma'am?" Jessica addressed Jasmine directly. "Would you mind if I took a look at your boarding pass and identification?" Jasmine handed over her documents with a calm that seemed to irritate Victoria further. Jessica examined them carefully, her training and document verification immediately apparent. "These appear completely legitimate," Jessica said after a moment. "Federal Identification Boarding Pass showing mileage upgrade seat assignment clearly marked as 2A. Victoria's eyes flashed dangerously. "Jessica, are you questioning my assessment? I'm just saying the documentation looks valid," Jessica replied, her voice beginning to shake slightly. "Then you're saying I'm wrong. I didn't say that, Captain." "Good, because I'm the captain and my decision is final. This woman is not boarding my aircraft." Dr. Jasmine Williams had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement. In 12 years of aviation oversight, she had investigated countless discrimination complaints, but she had never witnessed anything quite so blatant. Victoria Ashford was creating a textbook case of civil rights violations, all while being recorded by multiple witnesses. Captain Ashford Jasmine said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "I want to make sure I understand your position. You're claiming that my federal identification is fraudulent." "That's correct. And you're claiming that my boarding pass issued by your airline's computer system and verified by your gate agent is somehow invalid." "That's right. And your basis for these claims is what exactly?" "Your 20 years of experience," Victoria smiled triumphantly. "Exactly. I know fraud when I see it. And I know when someone is trying to game the system to get something they haven't earned. I see." Jasmine pulled out her phone, not to make a call, but to activate her own recording app. "And in your professional opinion, what should someone like me do when faced with what you consider appropriate air travel?" "Find a budget airline," Victoria said without hesitation, "or better yet, take a Greyhound bus. There are transportation options more suited to your economic situation." The gasps from nearby passengers were audible. Isabella's livestream viewers had climbed to over 10,000, with shares and comments exploding across social media platforms. "Did she really just tell a black woman to take the bus?" David Miller whispered to his camera, incredulous. "In 2024, this is insane." Miguel's supervisor, Carmen Rodriguez, had arrived at the gate after receiving his frantic radio call. Carmen was a 15-year veteran of airport operations who had seen her share of difficult situations, but the scene before her was unlike anything she had encountered. "What's the situation here?" Carmen asked, immediately sensing the volatile atmosphere. Miguel quickly explained the confrontation while Victoria stood with her arms crossed, clearly annoyed at having to deal with what she considered interference from ground staff. Captain Ashford Carmen said diplomatically, "I've reviewed the passenger's documentation. Everything appears to be in order. Perhaps we could find a solution that allows boarding to proceed." Victoria's response was swift and brutal. "Carmen, let me explain something about the chain of command. I am the captain of this aircraft. These people work for an airline that contracts with the airport. You work for the airport. I outrank everyone here, and my decision regarding passenger safety and aircraft security is final and non-negotiable." Captain Carmen replied carefully, "I understand your authority on the aircraft, but while passengers are in the terminal, airport authority applies. And from what I can see, this passenger has valid documentation and a legitimate boarding pass." Victoria stepped closer to Carmen, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper that somehow carried to the recording devices around them. "Are you challenging my professional judgment? Because I can call my chief pilot and have this entire gate cleared if you want to make this a bigger issue." But Victoria's threat had backfired spectacularly. Carmen Rodriguez had 30 years of experience dealing with difficult passengers, crew members, and airline personnel. She had never been intimidated by anyone, and she wasn't about to start with an entitled pilot having a public meltdown. Captain Ashford Carmen said, her voice now carrying official authority. "I'm going to need you to step aside and allow this passenger to board with her valid ticket, or I'm going to have to call airport security to escort you from the gate area." The standoff was electric. Victoria's face had flushed red with anger, her carefully applied makeup beginning to show stress. She was not accustomed to being challenged, especially not by airport personnel she considered beneath her station. "You wouldn't dare," Victoria hissed. "Try me," Carmen replied calmly. Meanwhile, Jasmine Williams was watching this entire spectacle with professional fascination. As a federal aviation safety officer, she had investigated numerous incidents involving crew member misconduct, but she had never seen anything quite like this unfold in real time. Ryan Blake, the first officer, was growing increasingly uncomfortable. His training included specific protocols about crew member conduct and passenger relations. What he was witnessing violated virtually every standard of professional behavior he had learned. Captain Ryan said quietly, "Perhaps we should step aside and discuss this privately." Victoria whirled on him with fury. "Ryan, if you question my authority one more time, I will write you up for insubordination. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am," Ryan replied, but his discomfort was evident to everyone watching. That's when Isabella Romano made a decision that would change everything. She stepped forward, her phone still live-streaming, and addressed Victoria directly. "Excuse me," Captain Isabella said, her voice clear and confident. "I'm Isabella Romano, and I have about 15,000 people watching this live stream right now. Would you mind explaining to them exactly why you're refusing to let this woman board with her valid ticket?" Victoria's eyes narrowed as she focused on the phone camera. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across her features. She wasn't accustomed to having her actions broadcast to thousands of people in real time. "Turn off that camera," Victoria demanded. "This is a public space," Isabella replied. "I have every right to record here." I said, "Turn it off," and I said no. Victoria looked around wildly, realizing for the first time that multiple people were recording her. David Miller's TikTok now had over 20,000 viewers. Other passengers had pulled out their phones. The gate area had become an impromptu broadcast studio, and Victoria Ashford was the unwilling star. "This is harassment." Victoria shouted, her composure finally beginning to crack. "You're all harassing me." "We're documenting discrimination," Isabella replied calmly. "There's a difference." Carmen Rodriguez stepped forward again. "Captain Ashford, I'm giving you one final opportunity to step aside and allow boarding to proceed normally. Otherwise, I'm calling security to escort you from the gate." Victoria's response was the final nail in her professional coffin. "Listen here. You people," she said, her voice rising to near shouting level. "I don't care how many cameras you have or how many of your little social media friends are watching. This is my aircraft, and I decide who gets to fly in first class. And I'm telling you, that girl," she pointed directly at Jasmine, "doesn't belong there. I've seen 1,000 welfare cases try to scam their way into premium seating, and I'm not falling for it today." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria had just made explicitly racist statements while being recorded by multiple people and broadcast live to thousands of viewers. The hashtag GateB24 was now trending on Twitter, with the video clips being shared across every social media platform. Dr. Jasmine Williams looked at Captain Victoria Ashford with something approaching pity. In her federal role, she had encountered discrimination before, but usually it was subtle, hidden behind policies and procedures. What she was witnessing was raw prejudice so blatant that it would be impossible to deny or excuse. "Captain Ashford," Jasmine said, her voice carrying a new tone of authority that made several people turn to look at her more carefully. "I want to give you one final opportunity to reconsider your position, and I want to give you one final opportunity to walk away before I have you arrested for trespassing," Victoria shot back. Jasmine nodded slowly, as if confirming something to herself. She reached into her briefcase and withdrew her phone, but also something else, a leather credential case that she opened and held up for Victoria to see. "My name is Dr. Jasmine Williams," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the now silent gate area. "I am the Director of Aviation Safety Compliance for the Federal Transportation Authority." Victoria's face went pale. "Badge number 7849. Federal authority over all commercial aviation operations in United States airspace." The color drained completely from Victoria's face as the implications hit her. "And you, Captain Ashford, have just committed federal civil rights violations while being recorded by multiple witnesses." Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Jasmine calmly dialed a number on her phone. When someone answered, she spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "This is Director Williams, Federal Aviation Authority. Badge number 7849. I need immediate grounding of Skyline Airways Flight 447 at Miami International Gate B-24. Civil rights violations and crew misconduct. Federal investigation to begin immediately." The person on the other end of the call could be heard asking for confirmation. Jasmine repeated her badge number and authorization codes. "Yes, effective immediately. No one boards this aircraft until federal investigators arrive." She ended the call and looked directly at Victoria Ashford, who was now visibly shaking. "Captain Ashford, you are hereby under federal investigation for violation of civil rights laws, abuse of authority, and conduct unbecoming an aviation professional. This aircraft is grounded pending investigation." Victoria tried to speak, but only a strangled sound came out. "Federal investigators will arrive within 30 minutes. Until then, you are not to approach this aircraft or interfere with any passengers." The gate area erupted. Isabella's livestream viewers had climbed to over 50,000 with comments exploding across the screen faster than they could be read. David Miller's TikTok was being shared by celebrities and news outlets. "Skyline shame Gate B-24 and justice." For Jasmine were all trending worldwide. Carmen Rodriguez stared at Jasmine in amazement. "Dr. Williams? I had no idea." "That's quite all right," Jasmine replied calmly. "I prefer to travel without drawing attention to my position. Unfortunately, Captain Ashford made that impossible today." Ryan Blake stepped forward, his face a mixture of relief and vindication. "Dr. Williams, I want you to know that what happened here today does not represent the values of professional aviation. I appreciate that, First Officer Blake. I'll be sure to note your attempts to de-escalate the situation in my report." Victoria Ashford finally found her voice, but it came out as a desperate whisper. You can't do this. I have a flight to complete. There are passengers counting on me." Jasmine looked at her with the kind of calm authority that comes from years of investigating aviation disasters and holding people accountable for their failures. "Captain Ashford," she said quietly, "you just told a federal aviation safety director that she looked like a welfare case trying to scam her way into first class. You demanded that I take a bus instead of flying. You claimed my federal identification was fraudulent. You did all of this while being recorded by multiple witnesses and broadcast live to tens of thousands of people." Victoria's legs seemed to give way slightly, and she leaned against the gate counter for support. "Your flying days are over," Jasmine continued. "Not because of who I am, but because of who you chose to be." Within 20 minutes of Dr. Jasmine Williams' phone call, Gate B-24 had transformed into a federal crime scene. Two dark-suited investigators from the Federal Transportation Authority had arrived, followed closely by airport security personnel, a representative from Skyline Airways corporate headquarters, and what appeared to be half the journalists in South Florida. Agent Sarah Martinez, a seasoned civil rights investigator with 15 years of experience, took charge of the scene. Agent Robert Thompson, specializing in aviation industry violations, began documenting evidence and taking preliminary statements. Captain Victoria Ashford sat in a chair provided by airport staff, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. Her perfectly styled hair was beginning to show signs of stress, her red lipstick slightly smeared from nervous lip-biting. The woman who had commanded absolute authority 30 minutes earlier now looked small and vulnerable under the scrutiny of federal investigators. Captain Ashford, Agent Martinez, began her voice professional, but carrying unmistakable authority. I'm Agent Martinez with the Federal Transportation Authority's Civil Rights Division. You have the right to legal representation during this investigation. Do you understand that right?" Victoria nodded weakly, unable to find her voice. "I need verbal confirmation, Captain." "Yes," Victoria whispered. "I understand." "Good. Now I want you to understand the seriousness of what's occurred here today. We have multiple video recordings of this incident, dozens of witness statements, and the testimony of a federal aviation safety director. We're investigating potential violations of federal civil rights laws, airline regulatory compliance, and professional misconduct charges." Dr. Jasmine Williams stood nearby, no longer just a grieving granddaughter trying to get to a funeral, but a federal official in her element. Her earlier calm had been that of someone accustomed to handling crises, not the patience of a victim enduring discrimination. Agent Thompson approached Jasmine with a respectful nod. "Director Williams, we'll need your complete statement for the record, though. I understand the broad outlines from your initial report." "Of course, Agent Thompson. I have everything documented, including audio recordings from my phone. You recorded the interaction I began recording when Captain Ashford made her first discriminatory statement. Federal regulations require documentation of potential civil rights violations in aviation settings." Isabella Romano continued live streaming, though she had moved to a respectful distance from the investigation. Her viewer count had climbed to over 100,000, with major news outlets beginning to pick up the story. "This is absolutely unprecedented," she whispered to her camera. "We're witnessing federal investigators responding in real time to what might be the most blatant case of airline discrimination ever caught on video." David Miller had ended his TikTok stream but was now being interviewed by a CNN reporter who had arrived on scene. His video clips were being played on news stations across the country, with social media experts analyzing the viral spread of the hashtags. First, Officer Ryan Blake was giving his statement to Agent Thompson, recounting in detail Victoria's behavior not just during this incident, but patterns he had observed over previous flights. Agent Thompson Ryan said, "I want to be completely honest about what I've witnessed. This isn't the first time Captain Ashford has displayed discriminatory behavior towards passengers. I've seen her make comments about passengers based on their appearance, their names, their perceived economic status. I should have reported it earlier, and I regret that I didn't. Can you provide specific examples? 3 weeks ago, she refused to allow a Hispanic family to sit in the bulkhead seats they had paid for, claiming their children would be disruptive. Last month, she made a gate agent re-verify the identification of an elderly Sikh man 3 times, claiming his turban was a security concern. 2 months ago, she told me privately that she thought certain passengers were getting too comfortable in first class." Agent Thompson's pen moved rapidly across his notepad. "Did Captain Ashford use specific language about race or ethnicity?" Ryan hesitated, then took a deep breath. "She said that some people needed to remember their place and that first class was becoming too diverse for her comfort. She used terms like 'those people' and suggested that diversity initiatives were putting the wrong type of passengers in premium cabins." Jessica Torres was also providing a statement to Agent Martinez, her nervous energy finally channeled into helpful testimony. "I've worked with Captain Ashford for 3 years," Jessica said. "She has a reputation among the flight attendant crew for being difficult with certain passengers. We've all noticed patterns, but she's very careful about how she phrases things. Usually she finds technical reasons or policy violations to justify her treatment of passengers. Have you witnessed her discriminate based on race before? Not as obviously as today, but yes. She tends to scrutinize the documents of Black and Hispanic passengers more carefully. She questions their seat assignments more frequently. She's made comments about passengers not looking like they belong in first class. Did you ever report these concerns?" Jessica's face flushed with shame. "I tried to bring it up with crew scheduling once, but I was told that Captain Ashford was a senior pilot with an excellent safety record and that passenger interactions were her discretion as long as safety wasn't compromised. What changed today, she wasn't subtle about it. Today, she said things that couldn't be explained away as policy or safety concerns. Today, she showed her true character in front of cameras and federal investigators. Meanwhile, Miguel Santos was explaining the technical aspects of the boarding process to Agent Thompson. Dr. Williams's ticket was completely legitimate, Miguel confirmed. The upgrade was purchased with frequent flyer miles earned through documented business travel. Her federal identification was valid. There was no technical issue with Seat 2A, despite what Captain Ashford claimed. Carmen Rodriguez, the airport supervisor, provided additional context about standard procedures and how dramatically Victoria had violated them. In 15 years of airport operations, I've never seen a crew member behave so aggressively toward a legitimate passenger, Carmen testified. Captain Ashford not only violated airline customer service standards, but also threatened airport personnel when we tried to resolve the situation professionally. As the investigation proceeded, more damaging information began to emerge. Agent Martinez had contacted Skyline Airways corporate headquarters requesting Captain Ashford's personnel file and complaint history. The results were stunning. Skyline Airways Vice President of Operations James Morrison arrived at the scene carrying a thick folder that he presented to federal investigators with obvious reluctance. Agent Martinez Morrison said, his face pale with embarrassment. "I need to provide you with Captain Ashford's complete personnel file. Upon review, we've discovered that she has been the subject of 47 passenger complaints over the past 5 years." 47 complaints. Agent Martinez repeated, her voice rising slightly. And she was still flying passengers. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. The complaints were handled individually. Many were resolved through vouchers or fee waivers. We didn't recognize a pattern until we compiled them together today. What was the nature of these complaints? Discriminatory treatment, unprofessional conduct, inappropriate comments about passengers' appearance or economic status. Several passengers alleged that she denied them services or seating based on racial bias. Dr. Jasmine Williams stepped forward, her federal authority now fully engaged. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice carrying the weight of regulatory power, "are you telling federal investigators that Skyline Airways was aware of a pattern of discrimination complaints against Captain Ashford and continued to allow her to fly commercial aircraft?" Morrison's face went even paler. "Dr. Williams, first. We handled each complaint individually according to our standard procedures. Your standard procedures allowed a pilot with 47 discrimination complaints to continue serving passengers. The complaints were never substantiated to the level required for disciplinary action. 47 passengers filed complaints about racial discrimination, and not one was substantiated." Morrison had no answer that wouldn't incriminate his airline further. Agent Thompson stepped in. "Mr. Morrison, we're going to need complete records of all 47 complaints, including how they were investigated, who made the decisions about resolution, and what policies were followed." "Of course," Morrison replied weakly. "We're also going to need the names and contact information for all 47 complainants. This investigation may be much larger than initially anticipated." Meanwhile, Victoria Ashford's situation continued to deteriorate. Her airline employee union representative had arrived and was advising her to remain silent, but the damage was already done. Multiple video recordings captured her making explicitly discriminatory statements while holding a position of authority over passenger safety. Dr. Jasmine Williams approached Victoria directly, her movement drawing the attention of everyone in the gate area. Captain Ashford, Jasmine said, her voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "I want you to understand what happens next." Victoria looked up, her eyes red with tears and stress. "Your pilot's license will be suspended pending federal investigation. Based on the evidence we've collected today, and given the history of complaints that Skyline Airways has now revealed, that suspension will likely become permanent revocation." Victoria tried to speak, but Jasmine continued. "You will face federal civil rights charges. You will be personally liable in civil court to every passenger you've discriminated against over the past 5 years. And you will be the subject of a federal investigation that will examine every flight you've operated, every passenger interaction you've had, and every complaint that was filed against you." I didn't mean," Victoria whispered. "Yes, you did." Jasmine replied firmly. You meant every word you said. You've been saying those words, thinking those thoughts, and acting on those prejudices for years. Today, you just said them in front of cameras and federal investigators. Isabella Romano had moved closer with her phone capturing this exchange for her still-growing audience. The difference between today and all the other days, Jasmine continued, is that today you targeted someone with the authority to hold you accountable. But make no mistake, Captain Ashford, every passenger deserves the same respect you were required to show me. The fact that it took a federal investigation to protect their rights is the reason you won't fly commercially again. Agent Martinez stepped forward to formally conclude the preliminary investigation phase. Captain Ashford, you are hereby suspended from all commercial aviation duties pending the outcome of federal civil rights charges. Your pilot's license is suspended immediately. You are not to operate any commercial aircraft or represent yourself as a pilot for any airline until this investigation is complete. Victoria finally broke down completely. Tears streaming down her face, her carefully maintained appearance dissolving into the reality of her situation. Please, she whispered. This is my career. This is all I know how to do. Dr. Jasmine Williams looked at her with something that might have been compassion if it hadn't been hardened by years of investigating discrimination and holding people accountable for their choices. Captain Ashford, she said quietly, you had a career because passengers trusted you with their lives. You violated that trust every time you decided someone wasn't worthy of respect because of the color of their skin. Every time you made a passenger feel unwelcome because they didn't match your idea of who belongs in first class. I never meant to hurt anyone, Victoria sobbed. Intent doesn't matter when the impact is discrimination, Jasmine replied. 47 passengers filed complaints about your behavior. How many others suffered in silence because they didn't think anyone would believe them or because they didn't know how to report it? Ryan Blake stepped forward, his young face reflecting the weight of what he had witnessed. Captain Ashford, he said quietly, I should have reported your behavior months ago. I should have protected the passengers you targeted. I failed in that responsibility and I'll have to live with that. But I won't fail again. Jessica Torres nodded in agreement. We all knew something was wrong. We all enabled this behavior by staying silent. That ends today. Agent Martinez announced the next steps in the investigation. Federal charges will be filed within 72 hours. Skyline Airways is under investigation for enabling discriminatory practices. All 47 previous complainants will be contacted and invited to participate in a comprehensive civil rights investigation. What about the passengers on this flight? Miguel asked, gesturing toward the still-grounded aircraft. Skyline Airways will provide alternative transportation, Agent Thompson replied. Dr. Williams, given your personal situation, will expedite your travel arrangements. Jasmine shook her head. Thank you, but that won't be necessary. I'll take the next available flight through regular booking. I want to be treated like any other passenger. James Morrison from Skyline Airways stepped forward desperately. Dr. Williams, please allow us to provide you with any accommodation you need. First class, on any available flight, transportation assistance, anything you require, Mr. Morrison. Jasmine replied firmly, the best accommodation you can provide is ensuring that what happened today never happens again to any passenger on any Skyline Airways flight. That's going to require comprehensive policy changes, training reforms, and a complete cultural transformation of how your airline treats passengers. Of course, absolutely. We're committed to whatever changes are necessary. We'll see, Jasmine said. Federal oversight of those changes begins immediately. As the formal investigation continued, the viral impact of the confrontation was exploding across social media. Gate B24 had become the top trending hashtag worldwide. News outlets were running continuous coverage. Civil rights organizations were issuing statements. Aviation industry experts were discussing the implications for airline accountability. Isabella Romano's live stream had reached 200,000 viewers, with her follower count climbing rapidly as news outlets picked up her footage. What we witnessed today, she told her audience, was justice happening in real time. We saw what happens when discrimination meets accountability. when prejudice encounters federal authority, when social media refuses to let injustice hide in the shadows. David Miller's TikTok clips were being shared by celebrities, politicians, and activists. The video of Victoria telling Jasmine to take a Greyhound bus had been viewed over 5 million times. But for Dr. Jasmine Williams, the viral fame was secondary to a simple fact: she still had a funeral to attend. As federal investigators continued their work, Jasmine quietly rebooked herself on a later flight to Atlanta. She would arrive a few hours later than planned, but she would be there to honor her grandmother's memory and speak at the service. Standing at the same gate where the confrontation had occurred, now swarming with investigators and reporters, Jasmine thought about Grandma Rose and the lessons she had taught about dignity, justice, and standing up for what's right. Victoria Ashford was escorted from the airport by federal agents, her pilot's uniform now a symbol of authority betrayed rather than earned. Her career was over-destroyed not by external forces, but by the consequences of her own choices. As news of the incident spread, something remarkable began happening. Passengers from previous flights began coming forward with their own stories about Victoria Ashford's discriminatory behavior. The 47 official complaints were just the tip of the iceberg. The woman who had thought she was untouchable, protected by her position and her airline's willingness to ignore complaints, had finally encountered someone with the authority and determination to hold her accountable. And it had all started with 8 words: "People like you don't belong in first class." Dr. Jasmine Williams boarded Skyline Airways Flight 623 to Atlanta at 2:30 p.m., 4 hours after her originally scheduled departure. The gate agent, a young woman named Patricia, who had obviously been briefed about the morning's events, treated her with the kind of nervous respect typically reserved for airline executives. Dr. Williams, Patricia said softly, "The captain has asked me to personally ensure that everything is perfect for your flight today." "I appreciate that," Jasmine replied, "but I'd prefer to be treated like any other passenger." That's all any of us want: simple equal treatment. As Jasmine walked down the jet bridge, she noticed that something had fundamentally changed in the airport's atmosphere. Staff members nodded respectfully as she passed. Fellow passengers recognized her from the viral videos, some offering quiet words of support, others simply watching with obvious admiration. The captain of Flight 623 was Maria Santos, a 42-year-old Latina pilot with 15 years of experience. As Jasmine reached her first-class seat, Captain Santos emerged from the cockpit to greet her personally. "Doctor," Williams Captain Santos said, extending her hand, "I'm Maria Santos, your captain today. On behalf of all professional aviators who understand that our job is to serve every passenger with dignity and respect, I want to personally apologize for what you experienced this morning." "Thank you, Captain Santos. I appreciate that. I also want you to know that what happened with Victoria Ashford does not represent the values that most of us in aviation hold dear. We got into this profession to connect people to make travel safe and accessible for everyone. What she did was a betrayal of everything we're supposed to stand for." Jasmine settled into her seat, ironically seat 2A, the same seat Victoria had claimed was malfunctioning and reflected on the morning's events. Her phone buzzed constantly with interview requests, support messages, and updates from federal investigators, but she had turned off most notifications. Today was about saying goodbye to her grandmother, not managing her sudden fame as a civil rights symbol. The flight to Atlanta was smooth and uneventful, exactly as air travel should be. As they approached Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, Captain Santos made an announcement that would be remembered long after the aircraft landed. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we begin our descent into Atlanta, I want to take a moment to remind everyone that aviation at its best is about bringing people together regardless of who they are or where they come from. Every person on this aircraft deserves to be here, deserves to be treated with respect, and deserves to feel welcome in the sky. That's not just company policy, that's our human responsibility to each other." The cabin erupted in applause, with many passengers turning to nod respectfully toward Jasmine. Later that evening at Mount Olive Baptist Church in Atlanta, Dr. Jasmine Williams stood before a packed congregation to deliver her grandmother's eulogy. The morning's events at Miami International felt both distant and immediate as she looked out at the faces gathered to honor Rose Williams's memory. Grandma Rose taught me that dignity isn't something you can give someone or take away from someone, Jasmine said, her voice carrying clearly through the church's sound system. It's something you carry within yourself, something that defines how you walk through the world, regardless of how the world treats you. She paused, thinking about Victoria Ashford's attempt to make her feel small and unwelcome. She also taught me that when you witness injustice, you don't have the luxury of staying silent. When someone tries to diminish another person's humanity, you have an obligation to speak up, to stand up, to be the voice for those who can't speak for themselves. The congregation murmured agreement, many of them having seen news coverage of the morning's confrontation. Today, I stood up not just for myself, but for every passenger who has ever been made to feel unwelcome because of the color of their skin, their accent, their religion, or their economic situation. I stood up because Grandma Rose raised me to understand that justice isn't something that happens to us, it's something we make happen. After the service, during the reception, Jasmine was approached by numerous family members and community leaders who wanted to discuss the implications of what had occurred. But the conversation that moved her most came from Marcus, her cousin, who had called with news of their grandmother's death. Jasmine Marcus said quietly, "Grandma Rose would have been so proud of how you handled yourself today. Not just the federal investigation or holding that pilot accountable, but the way you never raised your voice, never lost your composure, never let that woman's hatred change who you are. Grandma always said that dignity was the most powerful weapon we had," Jasmine replied. Today, I understood what she meant. Meanwhile, 600 miles away in Miami, the consequences of Victoria Ashford's actions were cascading through the aviation industry like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. By Wednesday morning, federal investigators had contacted 38 of the 47 passengers who had filed complaints about Victoria's discriminatory behavior. Their stories painted a picture of pattern discrimination so extensive that it shocked even experienced civil rights investigators. Maria Gonzalez, a Hispanic nurse from Phoenix, described being questioned repeatedly about her first-class ticket during a flight in March with Victoria, suggesting that someone in her line of work couldn't normally afford premium seating. James Patterson, a black businessman from Chicago, recounted being told by Victoria that his seat assignment was suspicious and being subjected to additional security screening at her request. Sarah Kim, a Korean-American doctor from Los Angeles, described Victoria making loud comments about passengers who couldn't understand English properly while standing directly behind her in the boarding line. Each story followed the same pattern, subtle but unmistakable discrimination, followed by complaints that were dismissed or minimized by Skyline Airways customer service representatives. Agent Martinez compiled these testimonies into a comprehensive report that would become the foundation for federal civil rights charges against Victoria and a corporate accountability investigation against Skyline Airways. What we're seeing, Agent Martinez explained to her supervisor, is evidence of institutional discrimination that was enabled by corporate policies that prioritized avoiding bad publicity over protecting passenger rights. The investigation revealed that Skyline Airways had developed informal policies for handling discrimination complaints that focused on providing compensation to complainants rather than investigating or addressing the underlying behavior. Complaints against senior pilots like Victoria were often buried in bureaucratic processes that made meaningful accountability nearly impossible. James Morrison, the Skyline Airways executive who had delivered Victoria's personnel file, found himself facing federal questioning about the airline's complaint handling procedures. Mr. Morrison Agent Thompson asked during his formal interview, how does an airline receive 47 complaints about discriminatory behavior from a single employee and continue to allow that employee to interact with passengers? Each complaint was handled according to our established procedures, Morrison replied defensively. Procedures that apparently didn't include any meaningful investigation or consequence for the employee. Captain Ashford consistently denied wrongdoing, and many of the complaints lacked what our legal department considered actionable evidence. 47 passengers lacked actionable evidence, Morrison had no adequate answer. The federal investigation moved quickly. Within 72 hours, Victoria Ashford was formally charged with federal civil rights violations, abuse of authority, and violation of aviation safety regulations. Her pilot's license was permanently revoked, and she was banned from any role in commercial aviation. But the personal consequences extended far beyond her professional life. Victoria's wealthy family, embarrassed by the international media attention and disgusted by her behavior, cut off financial support. Her husband, a corporate executive whose company faced boycott threats due to association with her actions, filed for divorce. The woman who had believed herself untouchable discovered that privilege could evaporate as quickly as respect when your true character was exposed to the world. Ryan Blake, the first officer who had witnessed Victoria's behavior and finally found the courage to speak up, was promoted to captain within 2 weeks. Skyline Airways, desperate to demonstrate their commitment to change, fast-tracked his training and made him the face of their new anti-discrimination initiatives. Jessica Torres, the flight attendant who had provided crucial testimony about Victoria's pattern of discrimination, was promoted to lead flight attendant and became part of Skyline Airways' new Passenger Relations Oversight Committee. Miguel Santos, the gate agent, whose nervousness had been overcome by his commitment to doing the right thing, was promoted to gate supervisor and played a key role in developing new procedures for handling discrimination complaints. But perhaps the most significant consequence was the industry-wide transformation that Victoria's actions had inadvertently triggered. Within a month, the Federal Transportation Authority announced new regulations requiring all commercial airlines to implement comprehensive anti-discrimination training for all customer-facing employees. Airlines were required to establish independent oversight committees for investigating discrimination complaints with federal reporting requirements that made it impossible to bury problematic patterns. The Ashford Protocols, as they became known in aviation circles, mandated that any employee with more than 3 substantiated discrimination complaints be removed from passenger contact positions. Airlines that failed to comply faced federal oversight and potential loss of operating certificates. Skyline Airways, facing potential federal intervention, voluntarily implemented even more stringent policies. They established a passenger rights advocate position, hired diversity and inclusion consultants, and created anonymous reporting tools that allowed passengers and employees to report discrimination without fear of retaliation. 6 months after the confrontation at Gate B-24, Dr. Jasmine Williams was invited to speak at the International Aviation Safety Conference in Las Vegas. Her presentation, titled "Human Dignity as a Safety Issue," drew overflow crowds and standing ovations. Safety in aviation isn't just about mechanical devices and weather protocols, she told the audience of pilots, airline executives, and aviation officials. It's about creating an environment where every passenger feels secure, respected, and welcome. Discrimination is a safety issue because it undermines the trust that makes air travel possible. After her presentation, she was approached by dozens of aviation professionals who shared their own experiences with discrimination and their commitment to ensuring it had no place in their industry. 1 year after the incident, Jasmine received a letter that moved her deeply. It was from a young black girl named Aisha, whose mother had shown her the viral videos of the confrontation. "Dear Dr. Williams," the letter read, "My mom showed me the video of you standing up to that mean pilot. I want to be a pilot when I grow up, and my mom said that because of what you did, I'll never have to worry about someone telling me I don't belong in the cockpit. Thank you for making the sky safe for people like me." That letter, more than any federal investigation or policy change, convinced Jasmine that the pain of that morning in Miami had served a purpose larger than personal justice. The final chapter of Victoria Ashford's story was written not in courtrooms or regulatory hearings, but in the quiet recognition that some mistakes are too fundamental to overcome. She pleaded guilty to federal civil rights charges, paid substantial fines, and faced civil lawsuits from numerous passengers she had discriminated against over the years. She eventually found work as a safety instructor at a small flight training school, teaching the same regulations she had violated, serving as a cautionary tale for new pilots about the consequences of letting prejudice guide professional decisions. On the second anniversary of the confrontation, Dr. Jasmine Williams returned to Miami International Airport for a conference. As she walked through Terminal B, she paused at Gate 24, now marked with a small plaque recognizing it as the site where federal aviation safety and civil rights enforcement converged to protect passenger dignity. She thought about her grandmother, Rose, who had cleaned those same terminal floors decades earlier to provide for her family. She thought about all the passengers who had suffered discrimination in silence before social media made such behavior impossible to hide. She thought about the young pilots who would enter the profession in an era where equality was not just expected, but legally mandated. Most of all, she thought about the simple truth that her grandmother had taught her. Dignity is not negotiable. Respect is not earned through the color of your skin or the size of your bank account. And justice is not something that happens to us. It's something we make happen. As she walked toward her gate for the flight back to Washington, passengers nodded respectfully. Flight attendants smiled genuinely. And the captain personally greeted her during boarding. Not because she was Dr. Jasmine Williams, Federal Aviation Safety Director, but because she was a passenger and that was enough. The sky that had once felt unwelcoming to too many people had been changed one confrontation at a time, one viral video at a time, one federal investigation at a time, and somewhere in the heavens Grandma Rose was smiling. If this story moved, you remember that change happens when ordinary people refuse to accept injustice as normal. Hit that like button if you believe respect has no color, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this powerful message of standing up for what's right. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel because stories of courage and justice like this one deserve to be told and shared with the world. Drop a comment below and tell us about a time you or someone you know stood up against discrimination or injustice. Your story matters, and together we can create a world where dignity and respect are given to everyone, regardless of who they are or what they look like. Because when we speak up for what's right, we don't just change our own lives, we change the world for everyone who comes after us. Thank you for watching, and remember, justice isn't something that happens to us, it's something we make happen one courageous moment at a time.